Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining this presentation today on coping with COVID. My name is Kimberly Kirt. I'm the short-term counselor, information and orientation worker at the UHC Hub of Opportunities. In my role, I work specifically with newcomers to Canada who are experiencing emotional distress or crisis situations. Today I wanted to speak with everybody about tips to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the uncertainty that we've all faced within these last almost 2 years. It has left a lot of people with their lives in constant turmoil and chaos, and a lot of us are just struggling to just kind of survive through this, whether that be physically, we're all trying to avoid contracting this virus, as well as emotionally and taking care of our mental health, because we are seeing more and more how this pandemic has been affecting people's mental health and mental well-being and wellness, and it has had a pretty big impact on those things, as well as our physical health, with the way that things are changing within our societies and communities. And so just wanted to speak to some of the ways in which we can take care of ourselves, especially with the holiday season coming up for some people, as well as the winter months. And now that we are seeing cases rise again within our region, we just want to make sure that we're taking really good care of ourselves and developing some strategies to do that. So when we're talking about COVID-19 and mental health and how they relate to each other, what we're really talking about here is trauma. So what we've all been experiencing globally with the pandemic, when we watch the news, when we lose family members who have gotten sick from the virus, we're witnessing trauma playing out in our lives. And when we take a look at some of the past trauma, previous trauma that some people have had in their lifetime, we are just compounding that trauma. So we are all experiencing some level of trauma at some degree. Even when we click on the news and we see these images, and we live with a lot of anxiety of what's going to happen tomorrow. With this pandemic and the ever-changing regulations and protocols that the government has put forth, it can lead to a lot of anxiety and almost traumatic responses in some people, particularly if they've already experienced trauma in their life. So a lot of people are grappling with increased levels of stress and anxiety, having to work from home, having to figure out, where to put kids who are out of school. There are just a lot of different things at play here, depending on what a person's lifestyle is and how the pandemic has kind of changed that. And then there's also the obvious. There's the loss and the grief that can come with, we have this pandemic and we are constantly taking measures to protect ourselves and protect the ones we love, but unfortunately, sometimes these measures don't work for everybody. And so, we're seeing a lot of death. We're seeing a lot of sickness, and to have that even within our own circles can be extremely traumatic, to lose a family member or to lose a friend to this virus. So we're also dealing with a lot of issues surrounding grief and bereavement, and having to cope through that and take care of ourselves through that reality as well. And we're also seeing some stigma and some prejudice that does tend to happen when we are afraid, and a lot of people might turn to anger, trying to kind of pin the blame on somebody, and that can be detrimental to both our health and the person that we might be targeting. And so we need to be aware that words do hurt, and that this has been something that might also have a huge impact on a person's mental well-being. And the quarantine and the isolation, many of us have sat through quarantine, have remained in our homes and had to kind of isolate ourselves from the people that we love and care about. And that can really take its toll on our wellness, both our mental health and our physical health, because we need that connection. And so that has been something that's very difficult for a lot of people, especially if you've already contracted COVID-19. Or you know somebody that has, and you've had to go through that 14-day isolation period. That can be a huge challenge, especially for people that live alone and don't have that connection at all. There are specific groups of people that have been severely impacted by the pandemic. A lot of these groups of people would include our marginalized populations, people that are already underrepresented within our communities, who already have a hard time seeking the resources and the help that they need. Newcomers would fall into this category. I mean, imagine coming to a new country as it is and not knowing anyone, but coming to a new country, bringing in a lot of your own experiences of trauma, and then having to come somewhere that you can't even see people. So during a pandemic, you wouldn't be able to there aren't as many groups or events available for a newcomer to seek out. We also see quite a bit of changes in mental well-being within our youth population, just because a lot of the youth have been out of school, they're out of their social circles, and this has been very detrimental to the mental health of youth, not having that ability and that opportunity to interact with their peer groups, as well as the elderly populations have really been impacted by this pandemic as well, especially if they live alone. Perhaps they don't have family nearby, or they've been separated from family. We've also been dealing with some border closures and things like that. So it can be difficult for everybody on a different level, just depending on your own experiences, the type of traumas that maybe you're already bringing in to this pandemic situation on an individual level, as well as some of your support system. So people who have less of a support system, or people that already feel marginalized within their social circles or within their community as a whole, have been deeply impacted by the isolation that has occurred with this pandemic, as well as some of the fear that they might be experiencing. And as I said, as I had mentioned before, some of the stigma as well, and the prejudice that I'll talk more about. But those are things that have really impacted specific targeted groups of people. So what can we do? We're all facing this together, and we're all experiencing it in our own ways. Some of it has been, we've noticed some good changes that have come from the pandemic, and we've also noticed a lot of very challenging and difficult experiences that have come from the pandemic. And so what it's really about is just learning how to cope when we don't have the certainty that we used to have surrounding even, basic things like going to work or going to school, or being able to go out, just freely go out and interact with people. This hasn't been the case now for these almost 2 years. And so really it's about taking care of ourselves, and we have to start at a very basic level, because we don't have the types of freedoms and the types of certainty that we used to have at this time. We're really just starting to get information about this virus and learning, what is best for us in terms of how we live our daily lives. But coping with our stress and anxiety, the biggest thing is to work on our self-care. And we hear it all the time. We hear, oh, self-care, self-care. And a lot of us, we don't have a whole lot of time for self-care. People are busy with with work, with families, with school. And so self-care is difficult. Self-care was difficult even pre-pandemic, but it is very difficult to find the time, but it's very, very important for our own mental well-being through this pandemic that we really try to make the time as much as we can, even if it's, 5-10 minutes a day of doing something that just really brings you a whole lot of joy. That can be really beneficial for both your physical and your mental health. So finding that balance, always finding the balance between your work life and your personal life. That's very important, especially in these days where a lot of us are working from home, or maybe a hybrid model. So making sure that we find that balance between spending time with others as well as taking time for ourselves to kind of recoup and, just kind of learn what it is that we need for ourselves. Rest and sleep, getting the proper 8 hours of sleep, I know is very difficult for a lot of people, but it is so important that we are getting that rest and relaxation. Taking naps if you need to, things like that, and exercising and staying active. For a lot of us, especially those of us in isolation, it can be difficult to get that cardio and to really make the time for exercise, but it's important, even if it's just, going for a walk around your neighborhood, getting some fresh air. That's really, really important because it's also our physical health and they work together. So if our physical health is suffering, so is our mental health, most likely, and vice versa. We also want to be aware that we're limiting intake of substances, so whether that's caffeine, so maybe sticking to 1 or 2 cups of coffee a day versus 5 or 6, and limiting our intake on alcohol and other substances, because it affects our cognitive abilities and the ways that we think, and we just really need to be focused and clear-headed. We don't want to go down that route, especially if we're feeling kind of down. We don't want to use that as a coping strategy. And then also a way to kind of cope with some of the stress and anxiety that we're taking in with the news and the media is just to limit our information intake. So if we're finding that we're watching the news twice a day and we're just feeling completely depleted and drained from it, we need to kind of be aware of that and limit the amount that we're watching the news or taking in information, and deciding, because we do have the choice of what information that we're taking in, knowing what our limits are when it comes to how we receive that information. One of the hardest things that has come from this pandemic is trying to deal and cope through some of the grief and the loss that has affected many families throughout the pandemic, with people that have lost members of their family to this virus, or people that are even in the hospital and having to wonder, what's going to happen to my loved one. One of the best things that we can do for that is just to name our struggles, to really identify what our emotions are. Because once we identify what our emotions are, they are less likely to have power over us. So it's okay to feel sad and angry and all the emotions in between, because that's what grief is. Grief does not follow this perfect continuum. People experience grief in lots of different ways and have many different emotions when it comes to losing somebody that you care about. Even grief and losing some things throughout the pandemic, people are grieving losing jobs, people are grieving losing their freedoms. And so just being aware that grief can encompass all things. It doesn't necessarily need to allude to death, but it could be lots of different losses that we've all encountered throughout this pandemic. And just knowing that, without the certainty in the world right now, all we can do is live one day at a time. So if you have to create a mantra for yourself to kind of repeat over and over again, this is a good one, one day at a time, because at this point, that is pretty much all we have control over is ourselves and how we choose to interact on our everyday. And just trying to, eliminate our stress through that, knowing that we do the next right thing, one thing at a time, right? Self-care is very important, as I said, especially if you're going through grief or you've lost somebody that you really care about. It's so important that you're taking care of your basic needs as well as your emotional needs, and making sure that you're talking to somebody if you need to. Counselors are available, making sure that you're talking to family members, anybody that you trust to talk to. That's very, very important. And another way to deal with some of this grief and loss is to create. So create something, whether that's through, some people really enjoy painting or drawing or writing, using those creative outlets to either memorialize the person that you have lost or to just help yourself with the self-care. Creativity can be a way that we can deal with some of those emotions, and it's a healthy way. So one of the other things I had mentioned that people are struggling with, especially our marginalized populations, stigma and prejudice. So unfortunately, with this pandemic, we've also encountered a lot of information sharing that has not always been accurate, and we've experienced a lot of discrimination targeted towards certain groups of people, either to point the blame at somebody for this virus. We take a look at fear and what fear can do to people, and that often brings a lot of anger, can spark a lot of anger in people. People want to put the blame on something or someone. And so, unfortunately, this is something that has played out throughout this pandemic. And so if you are somebody that is experiencing those kinds of discriminatory remarks, or any kind of stigma regarding, what country you came from, and how that relates to the pandemic, that can be really, really difficult. And so it's really important that you talk to somebody that you trust. You can talk to counselors, you can talk to family members or friends, but it's just very, very important that you're talking through those emotions, because discrimination should not be tolerated, but it's also something that you cannot work through alone, because the more you experience that discrimination and prejudice, the more alone you're going to feel. And so it's very important that you find allies that can help support you through it. And just to remember that you're worthy of respect. Everybody in this world is worthy of respect, and things like discrimination and prejudice should not be tolerated, but unfortunately they do occur. And so just always reminding yourself that mantra thing again, I am worthy, I am lovable, I'm worthy of respect, and just keep repeating that in your head over and over again until you believe it, because you are. And sometimes for some people it's really work to avoid any type of social media. We can scroll through comments and read what other people have to say and other people's opinions, and a lot of times it is not positive information, and it can be very hurtful to read or to hear for certain groups of people. And so I would advise to limit any social media intake as much as possible. It can be a good thing, to keep in touch with people, but it could also lead to a lot of issues of feeling those feelings of discrimination. And also, don't blame yourself. This pandemic, it is nobody's fault. We cannot point blame at any group of people, at any one person, because we don't know all the facts, and it's not fair to pinpoint that amount of blame onto an individual or a particular group of people. So coping with quarantine and isolation, one of the biggest things we can do with that is to keep busy. So if we're stuck in the house and, maybe we've tested positive for COVID and we can't leave, make sure we find things that, we enjoy doing. Some people enjoy cleaning, cooking. Some people just, want to relax and watch TV or keep in touch with friends and family over the phone, but really utilizing that technology. So now we have so much technology available to us. So maybe utilizing video calls or texting, anything that makes you feel connected to people outside is is extremely beneficial when you're stuck in quarantine. Continuing with self-care, I'm always going to repeat self-care for everything because you have to start there. You have to start with your own basic needs, and really make sure that you're doing those things for yourself. And all of us should be preparing ahead because we don't know if we will or could contract this virus. And so all of us may end up in quarantine at one point or another, and in isolation. And so it's very important that we know we have a family doctor, and we know how we're going to get our medications and our groceries, and have emergency contacts and work it out with people that would be able to deliver things for us. Just little things like that we should think about futuristically, if something like that were to happen. So what are some other ways that we can stay in touch with our loved ones, and still keep each other safe? With regulations constantly changing, just depends how many people we can get together with, and how much social distancing is necessary. So it's important that we be a little bit more creative in how we're spending time with people. So it doesn't always have to be in person, as we found in these last couple of years. We can write letters to people. We can send packages. A lot of people have been doing video calls and talking on the phone, and so always keeping in touch with others, making sure that we stay connected, and really trying to find different ways that we can keep that connection, is very, very important. Not just having to rely on the face-to-face interaction, because that's not always feasible, especially for many of the newcomers that might be very far away from their families, with the border restrictions and things like that. So it is important, and just play around with these ideas. I mean, you can get as creative as you want. You can go back to sending some of the old school mail, and making packages for each other, just things like that to keep us all connected, because we very much need that right now. And so I talk a lot about self-care, and I know a lot of people, their first argument is that they don't have time, but you have to make the time. So, whether it's just listening to music, it could be exercising. Some people really, really enjoy exercising. It's good for you. It helps. It gives you endorphins. It helps with your emotional health. But self-care could also be spending time with others. So, if you're living with your family, or living with a loved one or your children, just spending that time watching a movie together, reading a book, taking the time to read a book that you have been wanting to read for a long time. A lot of people find that prayer is comforting. Making food from home if you're a newcomer to Canada, and you aren't able to find places that have a lot of your favorite foods. Maybe trying to make something different. There's so many different things that we can do to take care of ourselves, and it is very, very important that we do that. And also to remember that, even when we've done all the right things and we're taking care of ourselves and we're eating properly and we're sleeping well, sometimes we can still struggle. And when you are struggling, it's very important that you reach out and you ask for help. We're only going to get through this pandemic together, so we all have to work together to support each other, and that help is available. So making sure that you're not always trying to be strong and like pretending that you don't need all that control. I think that it's very, very important that we're reaching out, and when we feel that things are a bit too much for us, that we're seeking out that help. That's very important. So I wanted to remind everybody that during the holiday break, my short-term counseling phone services are still available. So I am available to meet with you over the phone as well as through Google Meet, if that is more comfortable for you. So over the holiday break, I will I will be available on December 20th through the 23rd, as well as December 29th and 30th. From 8:30 to 4:30 p.m. So if you're experiencing any type of crisis, or you're just feeling lonely and you just need somebody to talk to, a lot of people find that the holiday season, if they celebrate, is very difficult for them, or maybe just like the winter months could be difficult because of the season change, because of the darkness. It can be hard for a lot of people. So I would encourage you to reach out to me in that time. And you can always leave a message as well, and I can get back to you. And then our regular hours at the UHC Hub of Opportunities will begin on January 4th of 2022. So then we'll go back to our regular Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 4:30. And we can set something up to have a conversation, just if you need that additional support throughout the holidays. My contact information is here. You can reach me via telephone or email if that's more comfortable for you. I do offer free short-term counseling for permanent residents and conventional refugees that are 18 years of age or older. If you have any additional questions regarding eligibility for services, you can definitely contact me, and I can give you some of that information via telephone. I thank you all so much for tuning in to this presentation today on coping with COVID, and I wish all of you that celebrate a very relaxing and safe holiday season. Remember the importance of taking care of ourselves, especially throughout these winter months as we're still faced with the pandemic, and remember to take good care of you and take good care of each other. Thank you so much.